My name is Pini Reznik. I'm from Reznik. So I'm basically a consultancy implementing AI solutions. And this talk is not really about actually what we do, but about writing a book, which is not the first time I have done that. So this is the book. It was published actually just last week. Yeah, so last Monday. It's very fresh. It just came out. The general idea of the book, yeah, thank you. The general idea of the book is that it's about mostly about the transformation. So how enterprises or smaller businesses move from cloud native or other technologies towards AI native, and generally how waves of innovation are changing, but the change itself is roughly the same. So it's not really about the book. This is actually the book. Yeah, I brought the props. Yeah. And about 6 years ago, I wrote another book. So this is not the first time. And there is a quite different experience because this was written before AI and the other one is with AI. So it's mostly the story of the second one. Now, when I started, there was this a bit of a fear, like what can go wrong, right? Okay, I'll use a bit of AI. It will save me a bit of time, but what are the bad things that may happen? So I think this book is what may happen. Now, I really hope the person is not here. I know he's in the US, but these are just random photos from the book, right? Now, you don't even need to read it, but if you read it, it actually makes it worse. But even if you just look at it, yeah, it's another set. It's almost the same repetitive piece of text with just same tools without much insights, without much information. This is another piece of just opening sentence or paragraph from a chapter, transformative, enhancing, efficiency, tremendous, multimodal, streamlining. It's not a language that normal people use or read or write. It doesn't say much. It's not like it's so obviously AI, and it doesn't reflect the insights of the person who wrote this book. Apparently, it is a best-selling book because I think there was nothing available. I bought it about a year ago, and it took me about 5 minutes to scan it and not read it, actually. So I definitely didn't want this. Well, I'm going to say that the story is in sort of 17 prompts. So those are not real prompts I used. I actually used, I don't know, the number of prompts, 1 million of different prompts, and I tried to collect the real ones, but it's impossible because the history is so big. It was impossible to actually use the real ones. But also in the first book and the second book, I'm using design patterns, which are, if you don't know what design patterns is, I actually asked the LLM to describe them. They're best practices expressed in useful terms or easy terms for non-professionals to communicate with professionals. So it creates common language between professionals and non-professionals. Now, I wouldn't consider myself a professional writer, but I ended up effectively writing a pattern language to write a book. So the first one was, this is how it started. Write me a book. Now, it sounds a bit stupid, right, and ambitious. Right? If you ask LLM to write you a book, it actually will. Right? You can say, give me 60,000 words, give me 80,000 words, give me the chapter structure, whatever you like. It will actually write the number of words. And there's this expectation that there is this magic that if you just ask, it will give it to you. And then you get this. So that definitely didn't work. So the second step was, okay, I have a pretty good idea what I want to write. So I defined a list of chapters. There were about 11 or 12 chapters. And then I spent 1.5 to 2 hours conversation with my colleague on each chapter. We recorded it, transcribed it, and then I had massive amount of text and basically content going throughout the book. Actually, I did expect this to work quite well because we touched different points, the content was there, the story was there, but apparently the story wasn't there. The content, yes, there are some ideas, but there was no story at all. It was not usable almost at all. Right? It was very surprising that this amount of content created and in real conversation with two people who actually know what they're talking about, and the result was totally not usable. So you're like, okay, fine, let's improve it. Let's try again. This is not good. Let's make it better. And then you go into this endless loop of it just not getting better. You try this one and this direction and that angle, and you ask different questions. And it turns it rewrites the whole thing easily, right? But then it just still doesn't work. It's just bad in different way. And also it creates a lot of problems. It rewrites the whole text and you need to read 10,000 words again, right? Without actually diffs, and you don't actually know what changed. At some point, it's very tiring, and you really lose. I almost gave up at this point. So then you find like an amazing thought, right? The LLM gives you some amazing idea. And well, okay, that's worth talking about. And you start developing on that. And then a week later, you realize that the idea was wrong, right? It's stolen it from some place, or it was just plainly wrong, a mistaken idea. And then you realize that everything you wrote on top of that is worthless, right? Because it's the assumption, underlying assumption was totally wrong. So that sort of led to, okay, I'm losing trust, so what can I do about that? And then at some point, I started explicitly asking the LLM to bring me like a evidence ledger. So actually tell me where it came from, give me the references. And today, it's actually much easier. Most of LLMs would already give you references, but this is about a year and a half ago. So at that point, the models were much simpler. So the difference is quite significant compared to a year ago even. And then a few months later, although being myself a developer, suddenly I have 300 tabs in Google Docs with different versions of different things. And I don't even know what's going on anymore. I actually didn't know that Google Docs had tabs in different documents, but when I realized that they do, then like it exploded. The number of tabs exploded. So there is no actual version control to manage it. Some tools there is and some not, but eventually this chaos. So okay, now I need to read all of them, keep massive amount of different documents in the mind, and then like, how do I even know which version is more recent than the other? But from that point, the things started actually improving. So all that was mostly just ideas going into all kind of different directions. And I really wasn't sure at that point if it's actually going to work out. Or I need to just drop it all together and start writing it myself, and then that's it, right? It's not even worth it. So at that point, I gave it to a human editor, and the feedback was, so it wasn't the full book, it was something like 4 chapters. And she told me that one chapter, which was actually heavily written by me, and not by LLM, but actually personally written by me, almost all of it, she said that chapter was about 80% good. The other ones were about 60% good. So at that point, it was like, okay, now I have something to go towards. She also said that the reading complexity was for postgraduates. You don't do books for postgraduates unless it's like a doctorate, right? So it's just not allowed. You have to write book for 9th graders because otherwise people just cannot understand what you are writing. But that was actually a turning point because that was a specific problem, right? So it's actually very easy to ask LLM, at that point ChatGPT, tell me more about reading complexity, and reduce it from postgrad to 9th grade. And you just did it, right? And then you read the sentences, you read the text, and it's actually reading dramatically better, right? The shorter sentences, better structured, less complex words. So this is a thing that LLM can do very well. Just turn around the text and change the words, and then the result is dramatically better. So then, okay, but it still feels wrong. And at some point, okay, whatever I ask it, it gives me the same thing in different ways. So then I get to sort of adversarial conversations with LLM. Today, it's commonly accepted that you need to explicitly tell LLM to actually give you negative feedback. But at that point, for whatever reason, people didn't know that yet, right? So it actually had to discover it, right? Because everything you ask, it tells you in a positive way exactly what you want, what you asked it to do, right? But once you start asking it to challenge you, then a lot of new ideas, it becomes dramatically better, actually. And then at that point, basically, it was clear that there is a separation of mechanical tasks of editing, reviewing text, improving, finding, doing research. There are all kinds of things that LLM are great at, but they are not bringing original ideas. And those original ideas need to come from me. Now, it's not a surprise. That was the point from the beginning. But somehow it's very easy to ask LLM, just bring me 10 ideas, and it does it. And I'm like, okay, I'll just use those 10 ideas. But then you lose the uniqueness and the insights that you bring yourselves. So at that point, what I started doing is just walking around, recording or typing different ideas, bringing it back, and just feeding into LLM. What's good is that the language doesn't actually have to be any good, right? And English is not my native language, so it's very easy to just get whatever brain dump you get, put it in LLM, and the result actually is quite good. And then at that point, the content was getting quite good, but the tone of voice was totally off. And then I went into this, again, another loop of trying to define the tone of voice. And you try to define it in words, and it's actually very difficult, right? You say be, I don't know, nicer, more professional, pretend to be this, pretend to be that, and it works, but it's still not me. But then I was talking to somebody who was telling me about a story how they basically, when they do code assisted development, they put everything in Slack, and then they use not just the code as context, but also the conversations between developers as context. And that actually really helps them to write better code. Okay, but I already wrote one book before. Why wouldn't I just use it as my tone of voice, as a definition of my tone of voice? And then there was this moment, like, I'll just take the entire book, and I just put it in the context window. Now, the book is not that big. It's almost 600 pages, but it's still less than 100,000 words. It's probably 100,000 tokens. So even a year ago, the context window was big enough to consume the entire book. That was magic, right? Absolute magic. You just put it in, and you say, rewrite the chapter in my voice from that book, and it's exactly that, right? Perfect, not just perfect language, but it's the correct language, it's correct tone of voice, correct way of talking to the audience. I think that probably was the most important point in making the book actually work. And then I had to basically go through chapter by chapter. There were about 12 chapters. You just take a chapter, say, rewrite in my tone of voice, and like a minute later, you have a chapter fully finished. Then still, there are gaps in actual facts, right? At that point, the book was almost finished, so most of the content was there, but there was a lot of polishing, like making sure that all the things I'm saying are actually correct and true. All the references are present. Everything is working and correct. It was almost like another layer of editing and improvement. At some point, I get to this sort of evaluation criteria. This chapter has the right things, then it passes, and then we can use it. And then the last point was, when the content was good, the models were fine, everything was working. The last piece that was missing was actually make it memorable, so make it interesting. And that comes from personal stories and anecdotes and metaphors and things like that. So that you can do to a certain extent. You can ask for metaphors and stories from available around. But then if you ask LLM to bring those stories, that it's the same stories that everyone else is using. So that's not very useful, not memorable. It doesn't make your book unique and yours. So at the end, I had to go through entire book and insert pieces of personal content and personal anecdotes and stories about past companies I worked in. So all of that was very manual. But the positive side was I just had to insert sort of a brain dump of that particular story and then just use LLM to normalize it. And that worked very well. Yeah. And at the end, just you have 60, 70,000 words, and you can in just one pass say, go over the entire book and make sure everything is working according to quite simple set of criteria. And those kind of things are trivial, very easy to do. And if I would do it manually, I would need an external editor, and that editor would take a week to go through and read every word in a book and then understand if it all fits together. So those kind of things are very easy to do with LLM. At the end, I did try to use it for visuals. I do have some diagrams. The diagrams are quite simple, actually. Some lines with whatever. It just didn't work at all. Now, I know that in the first talk, we saw entire video generated by AI, the entire video game generated by AI. What's interesting is that, yes, you can create videos and whatever you like about humans, but not simple models. Creating a triangle with a couple of words is like almost impossible, weirdly. I know it's getting better, but I couldn't use any AI. I tried different tools. At the end, all the visuals were done by a human designer. Yeah, and at the end, there was this sort of, okay, let's evaluate each chapter, each piece by, is it truthful, clear, is it correct voice, and is there a value in it? And if it passes, then we are done. So this is also, typically this work is done by external editor, because as an author, at some point, you lose the capability to actually evaluate your own work in critical way. Yeah, and the last part was that it actually was very easy to take a book and use it as a base for the follow-up work, either to create the content based on the book or any piece of content created following the book. I could just put the book as a content, as context, and use the models from it, the tone of voice, language, everything else, to normalize anything I create for any other channel. And the last thing is, I said I use a lot of design patterns. This is the template to create a design pattern. If you don't know what a design pattern is, it's a very particular way of defining commonly met problems and solutions, roughly. So we created this kind of deck of cards. Yeah, so each card is a pattern. We use it for workshops and everything. And we had similar deck of cards based on the first book. So in the first book, I had for each pattern to basically write it manually. I had 67 or so patterns, so it took weeks to write it down, then transcribe it, then give it to editor, and a very, very time-consuming and difficult process. It's worth it because you are collecting your knowledge and experience that you can easily pass to other people. But actually, LLM is amazing in identifying and writing patterns. This is probably the easiest task for LLM. So you can literally write a prompt as simple as this, and it will do it, and it will be 80–90% correct. This is quite amazing. So now I have more than 100 patterns, and I can tell in single prompt, go and change a format on all patterns, and it will do it, and it will be fairly correct. So these kind of tasks are just amazing. And overall, at the end, what happened was, so comparing the experience of writing those two books. In the first book, most of the work went into writing, editing, formatting, collecting the information, so a lot of manual work. It's in the same way as when we write code, right? Most of the work went before LLM went to actually typing the code in. So it's very similar with writing. So that changed a lot, right? So it really became more architecting the book, like finding the structure, finding insights, extracting them. What happens is that it creates actually a lot more of cognitive load on the person doing it. Because in the past, you would have an idea, then you would spend a week typing it in. Now you have an idea, then 20 minutes later, it's written, and now you need to come up with the next idea. So it's actually really taxing in terms of mental capacity. Right. Everything related to research, you still need to do the research. The point is that the technical side of research, of collecting information and turning it in different shapes, that's easy. But you as a human still need to recognize which research is relevant, which pieces to take, which not, and it's your responsibility to find the insights. What LLM doesn't do is finding insights. And if it does, they are not unique. Right? So the overall experience was that I was really more of a managing the project and architecting the system rather than doing the mechanical work of writing. Right. And probably the most important thing to take as a next step, as a first step for writing a piece of content with LLM, if you haven't done this before, is really the most important part is the critical view into what you're saying. So basically, it's about giving it an idea and making sure that it challenges you to improve the idea. I did collect those patterns in a PDF if you want to download it. It's not really in like production quality in a sense, right? So it's not a properly prepared document. It's effectively output of LLM with a bit of work, but it could be useful if you do want to write content using LLMs, I think. And that's from 2 days ago. We had a raffle of 20 books. I don't have 20 books right now. I thought I removed it, but you're welcome to buy a book if you like. That's it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Any questions before we wrap up here? Right in the front.
Hi, thanks very much for that. I'm an author and I wrote my book like 12 years ago, and I really enjoy the creative process where you have a trillion amount of ideas and you're refining and refining. Given that you wrote one pre-AI and now we're in the AI season, did you feel that you lost some of your own sort of personal creativity? Because time, obviously AI saves us time, but I'm just interested as a fellow writer, did you feel as if you lost aspects of your creativity?
I think in the beginning I felt this way. There was a bit of like magic thinking. Like I just rely on AI to do the work. At that point, yes. Then the result is these books that they're not worth reading because they have no insights. But later, in later stages, actually, I felt the opposite. Right? The first book was really difficult to write. Again, I'm not a writer by profession. It's not my native language. I had to do it with co-author. That's a good thing, right? But it was really difficult process. So a lot of the hard work in the first book went not into ideas, but in actually making it available and written properly. I think in the second book, I could actually focus on ideas more, right? And I could actually explore more ideas by collecting, making much deeper and broader research, and then get potentially better insights into the book, right? And then it saved a lot of hard work of editing. And I did have, by the way, I did have human editors and human designers and all kind of human in-the-loop interventions that actually made it probably less AI. So it's a mixed answer, I guess.
Awesome. Great answer. I saw a couple other hands. Was another one?
Hi, thank you for this talk. I was wondering what model do you use for writing your book, and nowadays any ideas for model choice?
Good point. I actually was planning to tell this. So I started with Gemini accidentally because I have a friend in Google, and he gave me beta access very early, so I get used to it because it was free, and ChatGPT was already paid, right? So I just get used to it. But you always somehow find the wall in every model, right? And then at some point in Google, I was like, okay, whatever I ask it, it's like it doesn't take me any further. So then at some point I switched to ChatGPT, and then later I used Grok. I never used Claude for whatever reason. I used different writing tools, but none of them really helped me more because they're all based on the same models, but they try to just put it in nicer documents, right? At the end, I actually used all the models together. And very often what I do is I cross-reference, I use them take output from one model and then go to another and then back, right? So to basically reduce the mistakes and improve they all have different personalities. It's weird to say it, but they do, right? So especially ChatGPT 5, it's very pragmatic and gives you the facts. It's not often what you want. ChatGPT is much better in terms of my personal language and way to express myself, Gemini. So yeah, all of them. And I would often, when I would work all the time, I would run out of budget of tokens, and in some of them, then I would switch to another one for a while, and then especially on deep research, then we would have a very limited number of deep research queries. All of that is not relevant today. The window like Gemini window is 1 million tokens. I can put 10 books inside and it still eats them. I know it will compress them and it will do all kind of magic to do whatever, but it's still very effective. So all of them. It's actually very important to use all of them and not one. That helps a lot to improve it, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that as well. But yeah, let's give it up for Pini here. That was an amazing talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you.